Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Tuyan Trin, and I am the Clinical Application Specialist at Hexoskin. I would like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Artificial Intelligence, Cardiovascular and Respiratory Health Research with Hexoskin. For the Q&A, please type your question in the box, and we will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, we'll make sure that you will be answered by email after the webinar. Today, for the first part of this webinar, and for the benefit of the people that are not familiar with Hexoskin, we will go over quickly the Hexoskin unique embedded sensors. Then we will go over the different field of application of Hexoskin. And today we have the great pleasure to have with us Mr. Pierre-Alexandre Fournier, Hexoskin CEO and co-founder. He will present all the benefits and the possibilities of the Hexoskin platform, including machine learning and artificial intelligence. For the second half of this webinar, we're glad to have as our special guest, Professor Thomas Beltrami, that will come and share with us his work with Hexoskin. He completed his PhD in kinesiology at the University of Waterloo in Canada in 2017 and is now a postdoc candidate at the Institute of Computing of Campinas University in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Finally, we will conclude this webinar with our takeaway message and concluding remarks. And our webinar will end with the Q&A portion. In 2006, when Hexoskin was founded, the whole idea was to develop body-worn sensors to record and organize personal health information to make it accessible and useful. Indeed, on the garment, there are 3 cardiac sensors that allow a 1-lead ECG at a frequency of 256 Hz, a sampling rate greatly acceptable for accurate cardiac analysis such as HRV. Then there are 2 breathing sensors embedded in the Hexoskin shirt that detects the breathing rate, every inspiration and expiration events, and it also calculates continuously lung capacity measurements such as the tidal volume and the minute ventilation. Finally, the 3-axis accelerometer within the recording device gives you the activity level, the step count, the cadence, and the energy expenditure. Hexoskin is a non-invasive monitoring tool. It adds activity context to the physiological data being recorded, and it gives information about the activity, the lung, and the heart function simultaneously. Over the last 5 years, the number of scientific publications with Hexoskin has increased tremendously, as seen in this graph. In fact, Hexoskin has multiple fields of application, as you can see from this graph, that show the number of publications classified by the field of application. In addition to the basic topic that is cardiology, respiratory, and activity, we now have research team using Hexoskin to monitor stress, sleep, cognitive state, and even fatigue. It is important to know that Hexoskin is not only a simple smart garment. All the body-worn sensors combined to the cloud-based database and the data analysis server constitute the core of the Hexoskin Connected Health platform. And with this Hexoskin platform, not only you can do work in the classic field of research, but now you can, with our system, collect rich data, access our open API, and use machine learning to push your analysis even further. Now I will give the floor to Pierre-Alexandre Fournier, Hexoskin CEO and co-founder, that will present all the benefits and the possibility of AI in health research.
Thank you, Dr. Trin, for this overview of the Hexoskin platform, and hello, everyone. Now I'm going to talk more specifically about AI, machine learning, and strategies and best practices to collect data and build useful AI systems. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we can mean different things. So I'd like to start by defining 3 types of techniques or approaches to AI: expert systems, machine learning models, alarms, signatures, and groups. The first approach is a category we call expert systems. Most AI companies today are solving problems by putting together a set of simple rules. For example, by mixing statistics, decision trees, and simple Bayesian rules. We could say it's human design with statistics. Because a lot of important problems in healthcare and health research are small data, it makes sense to make simple, explainable models, and very often it's good enough to achieve a performance that useful in a short amount of time. Now, I know many purists will say expert systems are not really AI, even when they use experimental data to optimize their parameters. Whatever these products should be called AI or not isn't very important. What's important is, do they solve a problem? And do they solve it well enough that we want to use it? The second approach is using machine learning. Machine learning modeling is used to learn relationships between inputs A and outputs B using experimental data. Concretely, this means we want to use data about symptoms to recommend a diagnosis, a treatment, or further testing based on recorded events annotated by professionals. Machine learning models can be simple, but they can also be very complex. For example, lab tests for blood samples will lead to only a few dozen parameters, but imaging systems like X-rays, ultrasounds, and MRIs may have millions of pixels or voxels as inputs. It's interesting to note that some models can also provide an accuracy estimate, which can be really useful in a recommendation system. Alarm signatures and groups are tasks that can be done in what we call an unsupervised way. It's not necessarily about mapping A to B. It's about finding patterns that meet a certain criteria. For example, outliers are exceptional events which should trigger an alarm or a warning in a monitoring system or a recommendation system. Patterns can define a signature, an identity that can be used to quickly distinguish between two individuals or find a biomarker for a health condition. Groups or clusters or sets of similar data in a data set or an event list. It can be used to segment a patient population to optimize the number of care protocols, for example. Again, experts will want to add nuances to these definitions, but the important thing to remember is that these tasks can be solved using artificial intelligence or a data science approach. Now let's step back for a moment because I think it's very important to cut through the hype about AI in healthcare that we've seen over the past few years. Sadly, a lot of recent media coverage portrays AI as some kind of magical technique promising to solve complex problems in a time frame that is way too optimistic. When we discuss AI in healthcare, we should never forget to ask for accountability, meaning data about performance, validity, or usefulness. Because in reality, AI development in healthcare is challenging because of the lack of data or data access and hard requirements for safety and efficacy. In reality, AI software from the point of view of the user is just regular software with the same kind of user interface and user experience challenges. And in reality, AI needs to be a lot more than a formula. It's a product that needs to fit in an existing workflow or a new workflow. In a nutshell, what we want to do in most AI projects is to learn to map inputs A to outputs B, to map data and symptoms to diagnosis, treatment, or further testing. We want to learn to automatically classify or estimate things. When should we go for an AI approach? AI makes sense if the A to B relationship is complex. AI makes sense if the data sets for A to B exist or can be created at reasonable cost. And in the context of healthcare, economics will generally work if it replaces a lot of human labor. These are the reasons why radiology and administrative tasks are being addressed first in healthcare by AI. There's a lot of repetitive tasks, cognitive tasks. Relationships can be complex. Think pattern matching in radiology. Data sets already exist. They were the first departments to use computers. And there's a lot of labor-intensive tasks happening in the digital space, meaning inputs and outputs can be systematically recorded in the current workflow, and AI can be added to the current workflow. Because if you already use software to do a task, using AI to solve that task requires less training or maybe no training at all. Now, the conditions for the development of AI algorithms are not equally present today in all domains. For example, many datasets for chronic diseases face a number of challenges. Poor datasets. For chronic diseases, long-term datasets are still rare and sparse, meaning data quality and quantity per patient is variable, full of holes, and often limited. Oftentimes, datasets contain just 20 or 30 patients. Bias in data sets. We often see 50% of the data coming from less than 10% of patients who are tested more frequently. And we have a bunch of other data quality limits, like missing annotations, non-standard coding or labeling, low resolution data. And this is a problem because chronic diseases represent a large part of the growth in healthcare costs, and many conditions are underdiagnosed and not well managed. With Hexoskin, we wanted to solve the problem of data collection for chronic diseases. Hexoskin allows high-resolution vital signs data collection over long periods of time in a form factor that's convenient and intuitive for patients. Hexoskin data can be coupled with other data sources, connected devices, annotation by patients, caregivers, and professionals, treatment options, prescription data, and socioeconomic data. It has an open data API that you can use with other software. Overall, the more we reduce the costs of collecting physiological data from chronic disease management, the more we allow the development of AI software to support the patient-provider relationship. It's important to be reminded that 90% of the work in developing AI algorithms is grunt work: data collection, labeling, cleaning, data flow automation, etc. Very little of the work actually involves training machine learning algorithms. Concretely, that means you need to think very hard about your tools and methods for data collection, or you may end up spending too much time collecting useless data. This is why we insist on defining data flow strategies for the short term and the long term in healthcare AI projects. Data flow strategies and formal labeling policies are key to lower the cost of data and increase quality for specific applications. You want to build a data set made to describe the relationship you are looking to learn. The clearer your goal, the faster you are going to be able to build a prototype that will evolve over time in a useful AI product. In addition to data flow strategies, we recommend to go through a checklist to make sure you have identified all the resources you need to make your project a success. For example, internally, do you have the roles to make this data useful? Do you have the internal resources in general? When you work with tech partners and providers, do they have experience with health data? Do they have the resources and roles to interface with your clinical team? Our team at Hexoskin can help you with both data flow and project strategies, so don't hesitate to reach out to us to discuss it. Now, before I let Professor Baltrami talk about details of his research, I'd like to talk about two examples where we can use the Hexoskin platform to solve the data collection problem for chronic care. My first example is long-term cardiac monitoring for at-risk patients. Once you're able to produce long-term recordings on a regular basis, it's easier to monitor the evolution of cardiac symptoms over time. It's also possible to do early detection of non-symptomatic problems like silent ischemia, atrial fibrillation, and many others. We can do real-time detection of these symptoms and regular screening of at-risk patients. These tasks fit the criteria we defined before for the use of AI in healthcare. Complex relationships to learn, lots of repetitive tasks, labor-intensive cognitive tasks, and we can now train an AI to do these tasks because we have a data collection infrastructure for cardiac patients. By the way, if you're in cardiology, we're looking for partners willing to generate annotated ECG data for various cardiac conditions. Please contact us if you're interested. This other example is something that gets us pretty excited. For the first time with Hexoskin Smart Shirts, we have access to a Holter monitor for the lungs. We can do continuous monitoring to complement spirometer data and inhaler data for chronic respiratory disease management, such as COPD, cystic fibrosis, and asthma. This new data opens a complete new field of research for these conditions. For example, Hexoskin's partner Medware in the Netherlands, along with 20 universities and Radboud UMC, have demonstrated that using long-term respiratory data from Hexoskin and AI algorithms, we can help manage the conditions of COPD patients and prevent hospital admissions. please contact us if you have projects involving COPD patients or other chronic respiratory diseases. Just one last thing for this section of the webinar. Most of you are already familiar with the Hexoskin shirts. We recently launched an advanced research version of the system called the Astroskin. In addition to the ECG, activity, and respiratory data collected by the Hexoskin, Astroskin does continuous measurements of blood pressure, SpO2, ppg, and skin temperature. The system is currently used by research organizations for long-term monitoring, including long-term monitoring of astronauts in the International Space Station. Please contact us to learn more about the Hexoskin system. And we are also organizing a workshop next month on artificial intelligence for decision support systems for deep space missions. Please let us know if you want to participate. I will also be available at the end of this webinar for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre-Alexandre. That was very inspiring. Now we will leave the floor to our special guest, Professor Beltrami, and will come and share with us his work with Hexoskin.
So, hello everyone. Before I start, I would like to thank Hexoskin for this great opportunity to talk a little bit about my work, especially about the studies that we developed at University of Waterloo when I was doing my PhD. And I will not go too deep into all the details related to each of the studies that I will be presenting today, because the main idea behind this presentation is to show you some general concepts about the use of wearables to evaluate aerobic fitness. So if you have any further question or comment about the content of this presentation, please do not hesitate to contact me by email, or you can ask me questions at the end of my slides. So the title of my presentation is Wearables and Machine Learning for Aerobic Fitness Evaluation. And throughout this presentation, I will try to introduce you the topic of wearables and why I think they are so interesting. I will be also presenting some basic concepts related to machine learning and some concerns that involve wearables. And after this brief background, I will show you why it's important to know about your aerobic fitness and how we can actually evaluate your aerobic fitness using wearable technologies. And at this stage, I will try to build up the rationale of predicting the aerobic fitness by wearables and machine learning by presenting you a series of 6 studies that we had published in the last 3 years. So wearables are usually private technologies because you don't commonly share your device with others, which might also indicate a good market perspective here, because every single person is interested in having their own devices to record their own biological data. Also, wearables are small, most of the time perceptible. They also present low cost, and of course, they are non-invasive. But why exactly are we so interested in wearables right now? Because one of the main issues related to wearables is how to use this type of technology to obtain information with clinical relevance. Because in one hand, we have all the wearable devices that usually are, as I said before, inexpensive, accessible to general population, and could be also integrated to our daily routine. But at the same time, all of this data collected by these devices still don't have too much clinical relevance. So let's say at the end of the day, you may check your mean heart rate response or the number of steps you walk throughout the day, but what all of this information means to you, how much you can tell about your health status by checking your watch or your smartphone and then at the end of the day. So on the other hand, we have all of the lab-based devices that have way more clinical significance here, but at the same time, they are expensive, they're not accessible to general population, and not practical at all. Therefore, the main goal here is to bring more meaning to the data collected by wearables. So basically, wearables present new possibilities for ambulatory data collection in realistic settings. Thus, we can acquire more biological data in a larger population, which may also increase the time resolution of the acquisition of available health-related indexes outside of the control environments. And what we are seeing now more than ever is that people are very interested in their own biological data to monitor health. Therefore, companies are developing different types of wearables, and they are actually doing a really good job in terms of hardware development. However, the question of how to bring more meaning to the data sets collected by these wearables is still very persistent. Here in this chart, you can see that companies should be delivering around 230 million of devices by the year of 2020, which represents a market share of around $37 billion by this same year. But now try to imagine 200 million devices collecting data and stopping throughout the day. How do we actually mine information from this data? So this question brings me to the next topic of machine learning, which is a very clever approach of dealing with this huge amount of data obtained by wearables. So here you can see an example of a real time series data collected at 500 Hertz from a bunch of different sensors for around 40 minutes of physical activity. But now try to expand this data set to one entire day, a week, or even a month. We are talking about billions of samples. So as I said before, we need to look at this data set and extract information that matters. Now, more related to the Hexoskin, its algorithms already make a really good job in terms of translating the raw signal from the sensors into second-by-second physiological variables, such as heart rate and pulmonary ventilation, which in fact save us a lot of time because this initial feature extraction process is complicated sometimes due to noise and movement artifacts. But now that, at least in the case of Hexoskin, of course, we have all of these variables extracted from the raw signal, we have to define which of them we are going to use to teach a given machine learning model to predict something that matters from a clinical perspective. So the basic idea here is that we offer to the machine some examples of data sets containing all of the selected variables from the Hexoskin, as known as the inputs, and the indexes that we want to predict, as known as the outputs. So this initial algorithm evolves or learns to the point of being able to predict the output, which means the index that we want to know, by only the inputs or the variables from the Hexoskin. So at least in this case, machine learning can be defined as the process of creating new algorithms based on real-life examples, and in this is also known as a supervised machine learning approach. And as I said before, Hexoskin is doing a really great job in terms of collecting a good spectrum of long-term biological data, as well as cleaning and extracting physiological variables from the raw signal. And what we are doing here in terms of extracting information that matters to train some algorithms to predict available indexes based on these physiological variables. So what we actually do here is to train an initial, let's say a naive algorithm by offering it some real life examples. And by experiencing the relationship between a given input and the output, its algorithm evolves and learns how to predict the output only based on the input. So as I said before, we want to train algorithms to transform the variables from the Hexoskin or from any other device into important information, which in my case at least, as I will explain you later, is the aerobic response to all of the relevant information that the aerobic system brings to you. And we can use different artificial intelligence approaches to accomplish this goal. At least in my case, I've been using artificial neural networks, random forest, and support vector machines to translate data from wearables into meaningful information. And of course, I'm not doing this only by myself, because there are always people from computer and health sciences combined into these works. But the secret here is to establishing the right question or variable that we want to predict by wearables, which is ultimately related to the final users of the product or the device. So the take-home message here is that we can use machine learning to mine meaningful information from wearable sensors by creating smart algorithms for the continuous evaluation of health-related indexes that will allow us to track changes in health across your lifespan, to the point of being able to predict the onset of some chronic diseases. And further on, I will try to explain this process better. However, there are some concerns about the use of wearable sensors that we have to be aware. Data privacy, for example, it's an issue here because we never know how much deep we can go into someone's biological data. Some users may be okay if we are using their data to create algorithms, but others may not. So we must be cautious regarding data privacy here. And another concern, and I believe this is one of the main concerns related to wearables, is the scientific background of the sensing quality, reliability, and all of the data handling process. It is really important to make sure that the data that we are looking at was previously validated by independent researchers. Otherwise, any other conclusion might be compromised. Lastly, another concern is that the data collected by wearables are usually made as a black box data collection, because it is really hard to know if users are using the device in the right way. Here you can see a really funny example of someone using the polar band on the top of the shirt, which doesn't make sense at all. Okay, so as I was saying before, current scientific advances seem to allow us to use machine learning to process huge amount of data from wearables, which is the main goal of bringing meaning to all of this signal. But the question now is, what do you want to know from these wearables? We want to use machine learning for predicting what? Because so far we have the data collection interface, for example, the Hexoskin, and all of the tools for data processing, such as machine learning. But what do you do from now? What do you want to predict or discover from wearables? This question is really important here because it demonstrates the current scenario of wearables, where we have all of the devices that allow us to collect large-scale data sets and the machine learning power to process this data. But we are still struggling in defining the questions that we want to answer by using these technological tools. Well, at least in my case, and remember, I'm more concerned about health applications. If we could find a marker that is related to our general health, it will be great, because we can use wearables to estimate this marker, to track and identify patterns related to the onset of some diseases, and also related to unhealthy aging, for example. To our luck, or at least to my luck, the aerobic system seems to give us some tips about our current health status, and we know that a better aerobic fitness is linked with a better cardiovascular health, better functional capacity, which means that you are more able to perform physical activities, including the activities of daily living, lower incidence of chronic diseases, which is also related to a lower mortality rate. Also, a better aerobic fitness related to a lower perception of effort, which has a huge impact on the amount of physical activity that you can perform during your daily routine. And finally, a better aerobic fitness related to a lower chance to die from any cause. The concept about aerobic fitness, I will try to explain a little bit further on during my presentation. So in the lab, which means a highly controlled environment, we evaluate your aerobic fitness by measuring how fast your aerobic system is in supplying a given energy demand, where a faster response of this system is associated with a better, more fit person. So what we are looking here is what we call the temporal dynamics of the aerobic system, which is, as I said before, related to your health status. So if you're sitting all day long, not exercising yourself enough, or having no healthy habits, your aerobic response tends to become more slow when you demand more energy from your aerobic system. And the reason why the analysis of the aerobic system response is so important is because modifications on the way that you capture, transport, and use the oxygen directly influence the behavior of your aerobic response. Here you can see the measurement here that illustrate the connection between the air that it's being captured by your lungs and the mitochondria that uses this oxygen to generate energy from the muscle, for the muscle. Therefore, there is a given connection between the rate in which your mitochondria is using the oxygen with the rate in which you are consuming the oxygen at the level of your mouth, as known as the oxygen uptake or the VO2. And any modifications that might be happening in the middle of this process should change the way that your VO2 behaves. For example, if you have a heart disease, your ability to transport the oxygen captured by your lungs down to your mitochondria will be impaired. So your VO2 behavior will differ from someone that is more healthy. But in practical terms, it is really hard for us as scientists to measure all of these steps of this process related to your aerobic response without the need of some type of invasive approach. Although we can measure the VO2 at the mouth level using a metabolic card, which is a plausible way to investigate your aerobic response, or even better, we can use the VO2 measurement to investigate the temporal characteristics of your aerobic system, thus we can evaluate your fitness level. However, metabolic cards equipment are time consuming because we have to calibrate them, wait for them to warm up. There's also the time to set up the device and hope for the participant to feel okay with the use of masks. In addition, this technology is expensive. They're not applicable to real life scenarios. So try to imagine yourself wearing a device like this during your working hours and at the gym, for example. So the battery will probably die really soon, and you're not gonna be able to talk or even eat. So also this technology demand trained technicians to operate these devices, and it's really important to point out that some companies are trying to sell these devices as wearables. So, but we have to consider that all the downsides of these metabolic cards, I would say that this is more like a portable device instead of wearable. So I suppose that by now you are already guessing what we are planning to do here. In one hand, we have all the available information that your future can tell, but at the same time, we have this huge limitation of how we can measure the future directly. What if we could estimate your VO2 using real life or real wearable technologies? If you can do that, we might be able to track in real time your aerobic fitness by wearables. Therefore, we will be able to investigate your risk for cardiovascular disease, the mortality rate, considering your current health status, with is also related to your biological age. And in terms of future perspective of doing that, the idea here is that we can collect this huge amount of biological data and then investigate the relationship with this data with the onset of some diseases. Thus, we can create models to identify the onset of these specific chronic diseases. And if we can do that, we can take some actions for prevention. Therefore, we can decrease the mortality rate and increase life expectancy beyond saving a lot of money related to all of the burden associated with chronic diseases. So instead to wait for someone to get sick, this technology could be used to track preclinical hidden symptoms, opening a better time window for prevention. And this same idea or circle also works for sport context. If we could understand the relationship between sport performance, for example, and long-term biological data sets, we might be able to create models to predict the expected competition performance even during the training period. So you can change the training program in real time by checking the predicted of your sport performance. So the main objective of my research is to translate data from wearables to aerobic system responses in order to continuously evaluate general health status. So now I'm going to show you some studies that try to reach this goal. But as I said before, I'm not going too deep into every single paper because the purpose here is to show you some general aspect of our findings and how they are connected between the studies. If you want more information about that, please feel free to contact me and then I can give you a copy of the papers. So these 6 papers were divided according to the degree of the experimental control of the exercise protocol that we use to test our participants, because since our purpose here was to evaluate the aerobic fitness by wearables during unsupervised realistic activities, we decided to first understand the aerobic fitness during controlled exercise protocols to better also control the variables. But at the same time, the practical applicability of our results was lower, as expected. And as we progress across our studies, which means less control over the experimental protocol, the practical applicability of our results increased, but the complexity of our findings also increased. Therefore, more complex methods were necessary. So since the evaluation of the aerobic fitness by wearables will involve the prediction of the oxygen uptake at some stage of our research, we decide to test how complex the VO2 or the oxygen uptake response was before trying to predict it during random physical activities, as expected during different daily routines. So the main objective of our first paper, published in Experimental Physiology, was to explore the aerobic system complexity during random exercise. But since we were still controlling the variables here, our participants performed the physical activities in a cycle ergometer. And what we found here using some computer simulations was that the behavior of the VO2 didn't follow a first-order linear system, and simple linear regressions were not enough to predict the aerobic response. Therefore, first-order linear models might not account for the complexity of the VO2 behavior during random activities. Okay, but let's say in the future we have models complex enough to predict the VO2. How will we look at this predicted VO2 data and transform it in aerobic fitness during random physical activities? Because remember, we evaluate aerobic fitness only in the lab using control exercises. So this question brings me to the second paper that had the main goal to develop an index that is able to extract the temporal dynamics of the VO2 response, which, as you remember, is related to your aerobic fitness during random physical activities. In this paper, we describe the methods for obtaining the index, mean normalized gain, or MNG, which is based on frequency domain analysis that we found better to handle random signals since it doesn't use any explicit modeling technique to evaluate the temporal characteristics of the aerobic system or the aerobic fitness in this case. So here we found that MNG was able to extract the aerobic fitness level based on random exercise or physical activity. And in the future, this index has the potential to be used during even more complex random activities as expected during activities of daily living, because so far we only had used cycle ergometers, including during this study. Thus, in these two papers, we've learned about the behavior of the VO2 during random activities and how to extract meaningful information based on the oxygen uptake during these activities. Now we decide to start trying some data predictions during using machine learning. So at this stage, machine learning was introduced to our research. In this paper, published in Journal of Applied Physiology, we had the main goal to predict the oxygen uptake and its temporal dynamics during treadmill walking exercise. So as you can see, we moved from cycling to walking, which is a more realistic physical activity. So in this paper, we train a specific artificial neural network to predict the VO2 based on different inputs, including heart rate that might be coming from the Hexoskin, for example. But even before that, we test more than 20 different machine learning approaches to predict the VO2 behavior. But these networks were always returning the best predictions. And as you can see here, that specific network was predicting the VO2 very well during incremental walking exercise and also during constant workload exercise. And as a conclusion for this paper, we have that machine learning can account for the complexity of the VO2 response. Thus, it can be used to predict the aerobic system temporal dynamics or fitness level, at least during walking, treadmill walking activities. Therefore, in the future, this AI algorithm can integrate treadmill embedded systems. So far we have investigated how to extract aerobic fitness from VO2 data and the use of machine learning for VO2 prediction. Therefore, at this stage, we decide to study the aerobic fitness during more realistic activities like overground walking instead of treadmill exercise, because as you may remember, the idea was to control less the exercise protocol as we progress across our studies. Which brings me to my third study that had the main objective to analyze the aerobic fitness during random overground walking activity using some variables from the Hexoskin, mainly the acceleration of the hip. And we found that we can use the hip acceleration, here measured by the Hexoskin, as a proxy of how much energy we are demanding from the aerobic system during overground walking activities, which is very important to know when we are investigating the temporal dynamics of the VO2 response. We also found that the aerobic fitness was correlated with the aerobic power, which means that if your aerobic system is optimized in supplying the energy demand as fast as possible, it also has a higher capacity in capture, deliver, and use the oxygen during maximal energy demand. And also, we found that the aerobic fitness level was similar between overground walking activities and cycling activities. So far we have investigated the aerobic fitness during realistic activities such as overground walking and some machine learning algorithms to predict the VO2 or the oxygen uptake during treadmill walking exercises. So we decided to try to predict the VO2 during even more realistic physical activities, which brings me to our next study that had the main goal to predict the oxygen uptake and evaluate the aerobic fitness during more realistic activities, including simulated activities of daily living and also overground walking activities. And for this study, we use all of the variables from the Hexoskin to train a machine learning model based on random forest algorithm to predict the VO2 over time during simulated activities of daily living, which included using the computer, organizing a shelf, stairs, and overground walking activities. And as you can see here, the machine learning model was doing a good job in terms of predicting the oxygen uptake during simulated activities of daily living and during overground walking activities. And if we extract the mean normalized gain from this data as an index of the aerobic fitness level, you can see that the aerobic fitness was similar when calculated from the measured VO2 or from the VO2 predicted from the Hexoskin variables. And in conclusion, we can use machine learning to predict the VO2 during activities of daily living. And in combination with the mean normalized gain index, we can characterize the aerobic fitness using wearables, at least during simulated activities of daily living. So far we have the algorithms to predict the VO2 and all of the methods to characterize the aerobic fitness. However, there were still some form of control over the exercise protocols that we were using. So we decided to combine everything to finally evaluate the aerobic fitness during completely random unsupervised activities, which bring us to our last study that had the main goal to evaluate the aerobic fitness during unsupervised activities of daily living. And for this study, our participants were using the Hexoskin for around 7 hours a day for 4 days. And here you can see an example of one of our participants with all of the data collected by the Hexoskin plus the predicted oxygen uptake using the same algorithm that I had described in the previous paper. And in order to extract the mean normalized gain or the temporal characteristics of the VO2 response from the random VO2 data, we built a computer program also based on frequency domain analysis that was able to mine the mean normalized gain from the estimated VO2 throughout the day. And here you can see the software working in real time. And when we compare the aerobic fitness from the Hexoskin, it's fairly similar to the aerobic fitness measured during laboratory conditions. So as a conclusion for this study, we found that we can investigate aerobic fitness using Hexoskin, and Hexoskin we can use this index to obtain markers that have a clinical significance. In terms of future perspective, we might be able to identify subclinical patterns in aerobic fitness changes that might be occurring even before the onset of some diseases. And as a general conclusion of this presentation, despite the complexity of the aerobic system responses to activities of daily living, the aerobic fitness level can be evaluated from longitudinal data sets obtained by wearable sensors. So a huge thanks to my former PhD supervisor, Dr. Richard Hilson, and my former lab mates, and also to my current lab colleagues, especially my supervisors, Dr. Aparecida Maria Catay and Dr. Ricardo Torres. So thanks everyone for watching. And as I said before, feel free to ask me questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Beltrami. This was very interesting. Now, in concluding remarks, we review how AI can help automate diagnosis and support human decisions. Also, at Hexoskin, we encourage and promote good science and the development of new research projects by providing support and assistance throughout your study. Indeed, Hexoskin offers not only interoperable software solutions, but also secure and private infrastructure and machine learning services to support research and professional organization. In fact, our team of data scientists can help you with your AI project by guiding you through the requirement and planning process, by providing data collection tools and software, by helping you with data preparation, processing, and analysis, by helping you with custom algorithm development and documentation, and by supporting you in the dissemination of your results. Again, if you're working in the cardiovascular and or the respiratory field and you're interested to start an AI project, please feel free to contact us.